Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. How are you doing, Joe?
Doing good. How was your weekend?
I've had a good weekend. Celebrated a birthday and went up to Park City yesterday. How about
Nice.
yourself?
About the same. Did some
Yeah.
hiking and watched a bunch of bad 80s movies with my kids, so
Nice.
that's about it.
You got to
Uh,
educate your children. It's very important.
hmm Yep. Education is very important. Firm believer in
Sorry.
that. So this week we want to talk about a question that we're getting a lot, which is what should I do to create a data engineering portfolio of data engineering projects? So,
Yeah. And it's a tough question, right? Because I feel like with data science, there are a lot of nice data science projects that are fairly self-contained, where I can just on my laptop do something with pandas or scikit-learn and demonstrate my skills that way. Data engineering doesn't really work that way because you're generally dealing with really big systems. Now, the nice
mhm.
thing today is that you can spin up these big systems in the cloud just temporarily to do a project and then shut them down. So you can do this even if you don't have access to corporate infrastructure, which was a
Right.
problem 10 years ago.
And I think one of the things we want to touch on too is the visibility of this type of work, right? So if you're
Yeah.
going to spin up resources in a cloud, for example,
Yeah.
how do you document this so people actually know that you have done this before, right? So we're
Right.
going to get into that as well. Cool. So what are some ideas for portfolio projects?
And I have a really long list. And even writing this up demonstrated to me the breadth of things that data engineers have to know. Like it's not an easy profession in that sense. And so one of the first things I put on here was orchestration. Like I want to see that you've done something with orchestration.
What is orchestration?
So orchestration is the management layer that can handle a lot of different processes in the cloud. And so, for example, I could have an orchestration process that pulls data from an API and then loads that data into a database like Snowflake. And then I might have several different pipelines that run off of that same data and transfer it downstream. And then I might train a model on top of it. And then perhaps I even deploy the model. So I, as a data engineer, might be responsible for model deployment, even though my ML engineers are responsible for designing those models.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. What are some orchestration frameworks you would suggest people demonstrate capacity in?
So I think, I mean, the one I see most often is Airflow.
Mm-hmm.
It's very popular. There are some new up and coming ones. There's Prefect and there's Daxter. And Daxter I know a bit less about, but
Mm-hmm.
after our conversation today, I'm going to have to dig into it a bit to figure out what
Right.
it does.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I would say it's important also to know, sort of the data lifecycle and be able to
yeah,
show that you have skills across the data lifecycle. What is a data
yeah,
lifecycle? Well, it's understanding source systems, right?
right,
So, and getting data from source systems. A system could be an API, could be a database, but then you want to take that data and ingest it and then load it somewhere. So you have to know about ingestion, loading data, and then the somewhere part indicates you know something about storage.
yeah,
And then, of course, you got to process the data, right? So then you got to know about transformations, and then, maybe putting that transform data set into another storage area. Might be a data warehouse, might be a object storage, or any number of other places. And then also demonstrating, I would say, an understanding of kind of downstream customer use cases, analytics, machine learning, right? So I'm going to take this data set and maybe make it available to train a model on, for example. There's any number of things, but I think knowing each layer of the data engineering lifecycle is appropriate, and then learn maybe a few tools within it, learn the fundamentals and so forth. So,
yeah. And I think orchestration is something that reaches across the data lifecycle. And so an orchestration project is an opportunity to demonstrate that you know that data engineering is not just one piece of this, that it's this whole flow that goes from beginning to end, from consumption out to some kind of utilization, possibly in a model. So,
right.
yeah.
Yep. And then I think there's other things too. You're probably going to be working in the cloud.
Yep.
If you get a job, so I would suggest maybe going to AWS, spinning up servers, getting an understanding of how things like EC2 work, right? These are the building blocks of pretty much every service you're going to use in AWS. So understand, EC2, even if you're going to be using serverless,
Yep.
I would understand IAM and permissioning, understand security, understand how object store works. So in this case, S3. Um, and then play around with the managed services once you have an
Hmm.
understanding of those building blocks. So with
Yeah.
streaming, for example, right, there's Kinesis, and it's pretty lightweight. You don't have to spin up any infrastructure. Once I think you have a
Yeah.
good understanding of streaming, then maybe spin up Kafka or something like that. And
Maybe Spark, like you can spin
Spark
up
would be a good one.
EMR, is turnkey.
Yep. Yeah,
General piece
exactly.
of advice on AWS is watch your costs. Like, don't
Hmm.
leave things running. It can get expensive very quickly,
That's a
but it
good
will be
point.
cheap. Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
What are some other portfolio projects people could do?
Okay, so you mentioned cloud fundamentals. Actually, I think we didn't mention functions, but I think Lambda functions or Google
Hmm.
Cloud functions are really good thing to demonstrate. We had a conversation on Friday talking about about the utility of functions in the data engineering space. That a lot
Yep.
of pre-processing can just be handled with simple Python code and functions.
Yeah.
SQL chops. So we're both big advocates for SQL, and I'm actually of the belief that a lot of data engineers have inadequate SQL skills, and it's not that SQL is an end-all be-all language, not at all, but it's a foundational language. Like you should be very good at SQL because that should be one of the primary tools in your toolbox, and then you go to other tools as you need to. So yeah,
Hmm.
get good at SQL, do a lot of SQL projects for transforming data in various interesting ways.
Right. Um, Python's another one. I think we see,
Yeah,
it's. I wouldn't say it's a lingua franca of data at this point, but it's getting pretty close to it.
yeah,
It's sort of Python spans data science and increasingly more data engineering applications. So learn how to code in Python, do projects in Python,
yeah.
and then if you're up for it, maybe a JVM language, Java or Scala is kind of the go-to. Although I think Scala is, I can make a pretty strong argument that it's not as necessary to know Scala as it was maybe a few years ago, just because
Yeah.
things are moving to Python. So,
I think that's accurate. Yeah.
mhm.
I'll add on Python. Python tends to be the language of orchestration. So Airflow and Prefect are written in Python, and your code you deploy there is usually in Python. I'm not sure
Mhm.
about Axter, but it might be the same situation. Python is also one of the primary interfaces for several different deep learning frameworks. And even though you're not a machine learning engineer, you may well be writing code for PyTorch or TensorFlow to manage processes. Python is one of the primary languages of the cloud. So in other words, if I look at the Google Cloud SDK, it's all in Python. And typically you're going to call libraries in Python to call APIs in the
Mhm.
cloud. You can use other languages, but Python tends to be the easiest. And so if you're good at Python, it makes you a very efficient data engineer. And then, like you said, look at some other languages on top of that. I
Right.
think the JVM languages are probably motivated by whatever framework you're using. If it's
Mhm.
going to be Apache Beam, then it's going to be Java. If you're going to be doing a lot of Spark, then consider learning some Scala, even though, like you said, it's not necessary anymore.
Yeah, and the thing you got to keep in mind is you're building a portfolio, so you got to make sure your
Yeah,
code is understandable and readable by people who are going to view your portfolio. And so Python tends to be, I think, a pretty accessible language to most people. Either they know Python or you can figure out what's going on in Python, I think, pretty easily because it's pretty simple to read, compared to other languages. So I think another thing you can do is contribute to open source projects.
yes.
So this is a really good way to pay it forward in the community as well as have uh, a tangible piece of work that you can point to and say, look, I
Yeah,
contributed to this project. Here's the code. You can go look at it. And the nice thing is too, if your code um, gets accepted into an open source project, that typically means it's been reviewed by other people, which means it's production grade. So you can also have that feather in your cap, so to speak, right, where you're writing production grade code in an open source project. Now, of course, not all open source projects are created equal, and I would say
right.
that there's some that may have different coding standards than others. But typically, if you're dealing with a group of developers, they'll if you can pass that gauntlet, I think it's a pretty big accomplishment, and that would be great for your portfolio.
Yeah.
So,
And I mean, to be frank, something like Apache Airflow is a great place to make a contribution or a prefect. I guess Prefect is kind of commercial open source more. Apache Airflow is more just true open source without a single sponsor company. The reality of making code contributions is that a lot of very banal things are needed. So in other words, there are a lot of bugs that have to do with new releases of Python. So they take the framework, they try to run it on Python 3.9, something breaks. Someone has to figure out why it's breaking, dig in, make an appropriate code change so that it's compatible with Python 3.9 without breaking Python 3.8 and 3.7 compatibility.
Mm-hmm.
So, go to GitHub, which is that I think it's hosted in an official Apache Git server, but a lot of the work actually happens on GitHub. So take a look at the issues, take a look at the bugs, go to the Apache, tickets and see what the problems are and see if you can figure out one of those bugs and then figure out how to test your work and deploy the tests and make sure that your fix doesn't break other things. And that's a contribution. And then your name is in the project, basically.
Yeah. Maybe another thing to do that's sort of adjacent to portfolios. We always talk about certifications. I think that you should consider getting a certification, but that shouldn't be at the expense of getting a firm grasp of everything else we just discussed, right? So the engineering fundamentals, language fundamentals, and so forth. Getting a certification without having those fundamentals just means you have a certification, and without being able to demonstrate competence, with actual data engineering, I think it's certainly going to get you so far. Because again, the assumption is you're making a portfolio because you're starting from scratch, right? So you definitely need to display some level of experience in something, and that herein lies the crux, right? Because it's how do I get a job without experience, and how do I get an experience without a job? Well, it's hard, right? And so get as many things stack as many things in your favor. But I think we're in agreement that certification should be on the list, but it should be the first thing on the list.
Right. Yeah, because if I see a candidate with no portfolio and just a certification in a vacuum doesn't mean a lot to me. If I see a candidate with demonstrated ability to run orchestration and write Python code, and they've certified on GCP, for example, that starts to mean something. Because if there's some context around that cert, I found personally that every time I've taken one of these certs, I've actually learned a lot of useful things. I always think, okay, I just have to review this. I've taken the cert before, not a big deal. Wrong. Every time it's really hard and I learn some new stuff. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that about one-hot encoding or whatever topic it happens to be. But yeah, it has to be in some context of actually being at least a quasi-working data engineer, right? Where you've done some projects that are related to real-world skills that an employer is going to want to see.
Right. Okay, and let's talk about the want to see part. So as we touched on earlier, data engineering is it's mostly invisible, right? You're talking about plumbing that's hidden for the most part. And so how would you make this stuff visible? This is again, because you're not sharing notebooks with people typically. You might, but it's not like data science or analytics where you can show off, here's my code to make a model, or here's my code to make some really cool charts.
Yeah. Yeah, so you mentioned here Slack groups. I think Slack groups are great, and there's just a vast spectrum of Slack groups. My only problem with Slack groups is that they can be a real distraction, right? If you have like 10 different Slack groups, but still, maybe reserve some time in the evening to just go look at your Slack groups. And you could, for example, get on the Apache Airflow Slack, and when people have questions, you could research those questions and try to answer them. And then you're contributing to the community. You're also deepening your knowledge of the Airflow internals that you would use if you're using it on a job.
Yeah, and write up those answers and contribute them to Slack, but also make a blog post out of it, right?
Yeah.
Your main enemy right now, while you're making a portfolio, your main enemy is obscurity. Right. Nobody knows about you, and so the name of the game is getting visibility. So this means there's a couple things you could do for your portfolio, right? Make a website. Yeah. This could be WordPress or GitHub or whatever, but show off your work early and often, and then maybe post it into Slack. Don't spam people, but just say, look, here's an article I wrote that shows how to solve this problem, or here's an article that I wrote about how Spark works, for example, right? Maybe find something interesting about Spark that hasn't been done 1,000 times either. And then videos. YouTube is another big one that I think you're starting to see a lot more emphasis on. I mean, I think it's like the second biggest social network. So make videos and put them on YouTube, and then also put them on your site. So as you start building up this body of content, it's not just you and your resume and maybe a cert. Now it's you, your resume, maybe a cert, and this giant body of work that you can point to and say, look, I mean, I can show competency in all these things because, the content that I can show you. So
Yeah. Meetups are another one. And
big
there are a
time.
lot of meetups still running in spite of the fact that a lot of stuff is shut down right now. I mean, we've got Salt Lake City Python, for example, and Utah Data Engineering Meetup, and many, many others going on at this moment. These meetups like to have senior people come speak, but especially the smaller ones really like to have people come in and just research a topic and talk about it and say, this is what I learned about Dagster, for example, and here's a demonstration of how it works, and I'd love to talk to you if you want to dig into it further, that kind of thing. And then
Yeah.
ideally,
Oh, go on.
if those get recorded, then they can be posted on YouTube, right? And while we're not in person, just over Zoom, it works well, but also get them recorded once we start going in person again. Get someone to just video that and post it on YouTube for you.
Right. And maybe something you could do, a lot of meetups will have lightning talks. These are maybe
Yeah.
10 to 15 minute talks, pretty
Yep.
short. So you don't have to go into like this full on, demonstration and 45-minute talk about a subject. You just get in, hit the high notes and get out. And I think lightning talks are really good for displaying your ability to condense information into a quick, easily digestible form. It's actually, I would say it's hard to do this in some ways because the opposite, which is just droning on and on for 45 minutes, that's actually easier than I think being able to compact your message.
Right.
So if you're able to do that, and I think have like a really good, presence in lightning talk or maybe a full length talk, it does a couple things. It shows that you know the material well enough to teach it.
Yep.
Two, it just gives you publicity, right? So now you can just say, well, here's all. I also have spoken at these events here and on these topics, and yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to go. And then you can build up to a full length talk, later on. It goes deeper into a subject. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, lightning talks are great.
But again, your biggest enemy coming out, of maybe university or maybe just switching fields is you're invisible, right? And
Yep.
again, the problem is data engineering is invisible for the most part. So, the cool thing is though, you have so many awesome options these days to show off your work. Again, blogs, YouTube, Slack, Meetups, anything else any other avenues you can think of?
I think that's most of it for the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else, but yeah, just basically utilize every form of media you can, and ideally, you become the go-to person. Like if you answer a question on Stack Overflow is great, and that answer becomes like one of the primary things that comes up when people Google a topic. Your name is going to be front and center. People will get to know you that way.
Yeah, Stack Overflow is a good one too. Just
Yeah,
answer questions on there.
yeah,
Yeah, but the main thing is, you have to get out there and make yourself visible. Nobody's going to do it for you. It's going to be up to you. And like I said, but it's also the golden age, right? Where this should just be something that I think any professional does anyway, regardless if you're starting out or not. Like just at the end of the day, like your career largely depends upon showing your capacity to keep current, but it
yeah.
doesn't really do you much good if nobody else knows about it.
That's right.
And this also gives you a chance to build up your network too, because again, the worst place you want to be is you have to build your network like when you're absolutely have to do it. Then it's too late, right? So you lose a job, or you want to switch fields, and you didn't build your network. It's a cold start problem.
That's right. Yep. And the cold start problem is the hard problem, right? Like for students coming out of school, it's really tough because they have not proven themselves and they have no way to prove themselves. So follow these various avenues to prove yourself. Once you have that first job, it does get easier, with the exception that if you've been in one job for 10 years or something, people get a little bit nervous, right? That's what you were talking about. If there are layoffs or something, it can be a little bit challenging because they've seen that you've had a job at one place, but they're like, well, can this person really transition to a new job? And then just get out there and demonstrate that you have these existing skills and that you can learn new skills. Demonstrate your willingness and ability to pick up some new technologies. And we're not going to give you a list of technologies. Some people will say you have to know Apache Spark. There are tons of data engineering jobs that don't involve Apache Spark. But if you learn something about Apache Spark or Apache Beam, that's going to show me as a hiring manager that you can learn new things and that you understand the bigger picture of data.
Hmm. Yeah. I think if you understand how Apache Spark works, like kind of how
Hmm.
distributed systems work and whatnot, like
Yeah,
that's to me more important than if you, did a Spark tutorial,
right.
right? And I guess this also hits on a note. So, portfolio projects that you would do, say in Coursera, Data Camp or something. What do you think of those?
Um, they're okay. It depends on the course.
Hmm.
It's kind of a mixed bag. I've seen some that are just like super simple CSV parsing with Bash. That's
Hmm.
stuff that data scientists sometimes, or sorry, data engineers sometimes have to do, but it's not something I'm super interested in. I've seen projects where you spin up cloud infrastructure and then you write code to run in that infrastructure. That's more interesting to me typically.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's definitely worth looking at, but look at the project and try to assess if that's going to be valuable in a job or not.
Right. Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Well, cool. Yeah, I think to recap, keep everything visible, right?
yeah.
Your portfolio is meant to be visible. Get out there, build your network, speak at meetups, do lots of content. Content's key, and the rest will take care of itself, assuming that you're doing interesting stuff, obviously. But I think you'll know when you're working on something interesting. I think maybe I don't know. So
But I guess let's right at the end here. Actually, let me add to meetups are not just a way to give talks and get visibility. You should also be
mhm.
talking to working data engineers
Yeah,
and finding out what they do, taking it, buy them coffee, buy them lunch, find out what they're up to, and get their guidance on what data engineers need to be learning in 2021. And quite often you'll find that they need people at their companies, and you might find an in if they decide that
that's
you
a
can
good point.
contribute to their
That's an
work. Yeah,
excellent point. Yep,
yeah. So
totally agree.
network. We didn't emphasize that enough, I think, but now we're emphasizing it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Networking is so important,
Yeah.
and it's not a dirty word. It's
No.
it's it's how you build your career,
It's
right?
how you get things done. That's just how
Hmm.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. For next week, we're going to talk about I think probably grad school and data
Yeah.
engineering. So it's
I've
not.
been to grad school. Did you start grad school, or you didn't finish
I, I
grad
was
school
I
and you
was
said you
about I was
applied?
about to start, but I
Yeah.
didn't see any reason to. But
Yeah.
we both teach at a grad school, so um, on paper, I'm probably like the least qualified to teach from a scholastic point of view, but whatever. So
But maybe that's the point. We're not going to, next week, we won't come out for or against grad school. We'll just give you some perspectives on why it might be valuable and why working might be more valuable in some cases. It
yeah,
really depends on what you're trying to accomplish.
exactly. And also going to be dropping kind of a fun interview or I wouldn't say interview, just a discussion really that we had with
Yeah.
Andreas Kretz um, over in Germany. He's a big data engineering
Yeah.
content producer and really awesome guy. So I look forward to that. I guess until then, have a good day. We'll
Yeah. We'll talk to you soon.
okay, take care. Bye.